Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to our panel, Fractured Lives. I'm Alex Gilvarry. A few things I want to mention before we begin. I'd like to let you know that books by the authors can be purchased from Greenlight Bookstore outside the building where the authors will be signing downstairs, but after you can buy the books outside. The tent's right out there. At the conclusion of this program, we ask everybody to leave the room so the audience members for the next program can be seated and you get a chance to talk to the authors at the signing table. Welcome. All of these books today deal with grief in its many forms and life after you lose someone. In Laura's The Third Hotel, it's a husband. In Sigrid Nunez's The Friend, it's a close friend. And in Michael's book, it's an estranged father and a grandfather. Yet with this similar subject, each book today couldn't be more different. I had such a fantastic time reading these novels this summer. First, let me read the author bios of who we have with us today. Laura Vandenberg is the author of two story collections, What the World Will Look Like When All the Water Leaves Us and The Isle of Youth, and the novel Find Me. Her most recent novel is The Third Hotel, to be released in August, which it's already come out. She's the recipient of a Rosenthal Family Foundation Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Bard Fiction Prize, an O. Henry Award, and a MacDowell Colony Fellowship. Born and raised in Florida, she lives in Cambridge with her husband and dog. Sigrid Nunez is the author of the novels The Friend, named New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. She has also written Salvation City, The Last of Her Kind, A Feather on the Breath of God, and For Rowena, among others. She has been the recipient of several awards, including a Whiting Writers Award, the Rome Prize in Literature, and a Berlin Prize Fellowship. Her work has also appeared in several anthologies, including 4 Pushcart Prize volumes and 4 anthologies of Asian American literature. Michael Imperioli is best known for his starring role as Christopher Moltisanti in the acclaimed TV series The Sopranos, which earned him a Best Supporting Actor Emmy. He also wrote 5 episodes of the show and was a co-screenwriter for the film Summer of Sam, directed by Spike Lee. Imperioli has appeared in 6 of Lee's films and has also acted in films by Martin Scorsese, Abel Ferrara, Walter Hill, Peter Jackson, and the Hughes brothers. The Perfume Burned His Eyes is his debut novel. I think it would be great to just begin with a short reading from each of the authors. Laura, would you like to begin?
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for coming. The Third Hotel concerns a couple named Claire and Richard. Richard is a horror film scholar, which is my secret dream job. No luck yet. And he is killed under mysterious circumstances in a hit-and-run car accident. And his death is mysterious because the hit-and-run's unsolved, but also sort of doubly mysterious because strange things were afoot before he died. So I'm going to read a little bit of the book that gets into what was going on with Claire and Richard before his death. In her former life, Claire was a sales rep for ThyssenKrupp. Her area was elevator technologies, and her territory was the Midwest. She liked the job because it involved an endless amount of travel to seemingly anonymous places. She had been to Nebraska 47 times. What was there to see in Nebraska? A surprising amount, really. She knew where to get the best steak in Omaha. When she cut into it, blood pooled on the white plate. She had seen dawn turn the plains as lustrous and vast as an ocean. Once, late at night, she parked her rental car on the side of the road and walked into a cornfield. She stood on a dirt path surrounded by dark stalks and imagined a harrowing chase through the corn that culminated in her murder at the hands of a mass killer with a knife. In the night sky, she spotted the red flash of planes through gossamer clouds, and if she listened very carefully, more carefully than she had listened to anything in months or maybe even in years, she was able to make out the dull roar of their passing. She got back into a rental car and drove away and wondered if this was what people meant when they talked about mindfulness. Early in her career, she learned that one of the most important rules of travel was this: the answer to nearly everything could be found in the signs. This way to baggage claim, this way to the ticket counter, this way to Cleveland, this way to Omaha, this way to the hotel bar. Travel was one of the few arenas in life where clear and correct direction was so readily at hand. Lately, she'd been tasked with selling a new kind of cable to find hotels and high-rise office buildings and factories. This cable was made of carbon fiber and allowed elevators to travel twice as fast as they could with steel. They lived in New Scotland, a town on the outskirts of Albany. In their condominium, she kept a small rolling suitcase in the bedroom closet, stocked with miniature toiletries, exercise clothes, an inflatable neck pillow, and the book she brought with her on every flight but could never seem to finish, The Two Faces of January by Patricia Highsmith. It wasn't an especially long novel, but on planes she could only read a few paragraphs before the words filled her with a crippling and inexplicable dread, driving the book back down into the depths of her shoulder bag. It was not so much the story that unsettled her, but the hidden things she sensed quivering under the surface. Subtext, she supposed this was called, and she did not care for it. Every time she saw her suitcase in the bedroom closet, tucked behind a mesh laundry bin, she imagined it was waiting for her second secret self. She traveled so frequently it was not uncommon for her to wake in the middle of the night and think for a moment, where am I? She did not find this disconcerting, even when it happened in her own bed, but once she made the mistake of mentioning those midnight thoughts to her husband, and he looked at her like she was terminally ill. The travel had long been a point of contention between them. Why bother being married if you're always leaving? A reasonable question, and she couldn't say that she had an answer beyond the demands of her work. She wanted to be married and she wanted to leave. The two did not seem mutually exclusive. She had this second secret self that she didn't know how to share with anyone, and when alone, that self came out into the open. In the months before his death, her husband's own secret self started coming out into the open too. She could only assume this other self had been waiting inside him all along. The year of the great change. He was the same and he was different. The way he looked when his sleep changed. His face used to be smooth and expressionless, almost mask-like, but then one night she found him sleeping with lips parted into a wide, unsettling smile. He switched coffee mugs, trading out The Exorcist for the ghoulish face of Michael Myers. He was newly skittish around dogs. He stopped adding salt to his food. He stopped eating bananas. His pace on the sidewalk changed. He used to be a brisk, impatient walker, and then one day he began moving so slowly and contemplatively, it was as though every tree branch was a source of wonder. Claire struggled to imagine what 40 years into a life would cause a person to suddenly change the way they walked. There were alien, interminable silences when she called from the road, and when she was home, he took long, solitary strolls in the evening hours, a symptom that would eventually lead to his demise. Another symptom. He started demanding to know what she did on the road, how she accounted for all those hours alone, no matter how many times she told him the simple truth. In a hotel room, her favorite thing in all the world was to switch off every light and everything that made a sound, TV, phone, air conditioner, faucets, and sit naked on the polyester comforter and count the breaths as they left her body. Naked, her husband would shout, as though she had provided him with damning evidence. He had been an angry person for as long as she had known him, but it was a secretive anger. Most people found him loose and lighthearted, easygoing, That was the word people used, and in time she became suspicious of anyone who could be described in such terms. What was so easy about going? Naked and alone, she would say back, naked and alone. As a married couple, they'd had perfect years, and they'd had shit years, but she had never in her life experienced a year that so thoroughly dismantled her with confusion. On her next trip, she thought about what he would see if he ever were to trail her on the road. A woman marking up sales reports with a pink highlighter, a woman watching workout infomercials with a volume on mute, a woman eating room service quesadillas in the bathtub instead of reading that novel she claimed to be nearly finished with, a woman doing a little exercise routine, squats and sit-ups, bicep curls with bottled waters, completed with the hope that he would notice the smooth lines when he put his hands on her body. A woman breathing naked on the toilet seat, a woman breathing naked in an armchair, a woman breathing naked before the bathroom mirror in the kind of lighting that could make a person reconsider every choice they had ever made in life. A woman breathing naked in the dark. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm reading from my novel, The Friend, and the narrator here is mourning the death of her lifelong friend and mentor who committed suicide, and it was unexpected, didn't leave a note. And so first, in trying to deal with this, she, among other things, she reads a dozen books about suicide, and they aren't much help. She says, I did learn some interesting things. For example, that certain ancient sages held that voluntary death, though generally to be condemned, could be morally acceptable, even honorable, as an escape from unbearable pain, melancholy, or disgrace, or even just plain old boredom. That later thinkers have suggested that despite Christianity's absolute prohibition against committing suicide, though nowhere in the entire Bible is there any explicit condemnation of it, Christ himself could be said to have done just that. That in Western countries, the volume of suicide notes reached a peak during the 18th century when they were usually intended to appear alongside other public announcements in the newspapers. And this kicker, writing in the first person, is a known sign of suicide risk. She also consults a therapist. I tell the therapist about those uncanny moments after I first heard the news, when I believed there had been a mistake. You were gone, but not dead. More like you were just missing. Like you decided to play some horrid juvenile trick on us. You were missing, not dead, meaning you could come back. You could come back, and if you could come back, of course you would. Akin to that brief period years ago when I believed it was just stress or fatigue or some odd phase I was going through, and once whatever the trouble was had passed, my looks would come back. Later, I found myself often recalling a scene, the final scene from the movie Houdini. I'm talking about the old 50s version with Tony Curtis, which I saw on TV when I was a teen. He who had become world famous for his spectacular escapes dies while attempting to break out of the water tank in which he's been submerged upside down with his feet locked in stocks. The Chinese water torture cell trick he'd pulled off before, but this time, unknown to spectators, he is weak and in pain from a ruptured appendix. Dying, the master magician promises his wife, if there's any way, I'll come back, which gave me goosebumps then and still has the power to move me, even if I know that the real Houdini died in a hospital bed and that his last words were, I'm tired of fighting. I drag up another memory. This time I'm much younger, a child. Birthday party at the house of a friend, a large slate gray Victorian, to me a creepy castle. Hide and seek, I am it. I finish counting and uncover my eyes. It is a late afternoon, it is winter, and all the lights have been turned off for the game. Filled just minutes ago with bright, boisterous life, the house is now a tomb. I was told that the first ones to leave their hiding places to investigate found me sprawled face down on the carpet. Too much excitement, too much ice cream and cake. The grown-ups got it wrong, the way grown-ups will get children's troubles wrong. And I, frightened to the core and not having the words, didn't even try to enlighten them. But I never forgot. The tired phrase, deathly still, can bring it all back in a flash. The year before, my grandfather had vanished, followed shortly by our elementary school principal. Nothing that was said to explain these vanishing acts was very convincing, but that there was something nasty involved, some unspeakable thing about which lips must stay sealed, this was clear. The horror sank in. They weren't hiding, the other kids, they were gone, vanished into the same darkness, never to return. Only it remained, alone, alone, alone. The room swam before my eyes. I threw up before I fainted. Do I dream about you? Dutifully, I describe it. Wading through deep snow, struggling to catch up with someone far ahead, a figure in a dark coat, like a triangular tear in the vast white blanket. I call your name, you spin around, start semaphoring with your arms, but I don't understand. Are you telling me to hurry up or warning me to stop and turn back? Agony of uncertainty, end of dream, or I say, for some absurd reason apologetically, at least that's all I remember. I talk about the times I see you. Each time my heart turns over. But why should it be that almost always the person I mistake for you is someone who looks like you, not at the age when you died, but at some other stage of your life? Once I nearly shout for joy at the sight of someone who looks like you when you and I first met. I confess to sudden rages, walking in Midtown, rush hours peak, people streaming in both directions. I find myself seething, ready to kill. Who are all these fucking people, and how is it fair, how is it even possible that all of them, these perfectly ordinary people, should be alive when you, the therapist interrupts to point out that you made a choice. It's true that I keep forgetting this because very often it seems to me that it's not what happened, that it wasn't a choice at all, no act of free will, but rather some freak accident that befell you, which I suppose is not inaccurate, self-homicide being unquestionably against the natural order of things. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all, weeps King Lear, thou being his daughter Cordelia. At times, I can barely contain my anger at students. How can you be an English major and not know that you don't put a period after a question mark? Why do even graduate students not know the difference between a novel and a memoir? And why do they keep referring to full-length books as pieces? I want to hit the student whose excuse for not doing that week's assigned reading of 50 pages is that she had jury duty. I delete, without answering, the questionnaire from someone who is considering taking my class. Number one, are you over-concerned with things like punctuation and grammar? All that anger, says the therapist, yet none directed at you. No anger, no blame. Is this because I think suicide can be justifiable? Plato thought so. Seneca thought so. But what do I think? Why do I think you did it? Because you were trapped upside down in a tank full of water? Because you were weak and in pain? Because you were tired of fighting? Thank you.
So this is a story of a boy who's 16 in 1976, living in Jackson Heights, blue-collar life, kind of, and his father and grandfather die in a short amount of time. And his mother inherits some money from her father, who's dead, and they wind up moving into Manhattan in the East 50s in a pretty posh apartment building, and Lou Reed is living above them. And in 1976, Lou was using a lot, injecting very heavy amphetamines, and very creatively fertile in that period. And the boy winds up, this is a fiction, by the way, although I do use some real people in the book, but the boy winds up becoming almost like a gopher for him, and also a father figure of some sort. Lou becomes a father figure of some sorts to the boy. At this point in the story, Lou's girlfriend has left him, and the boy has broken up with his first love. I heard the music before I got to his door. It was open just a sliver, so I pushed it a little wider. He was on the rug playing an acoustic guitar. I had never seen him with anything but an electric. He played a very simple riff over and over again, 2 chords. It was hypnotic, concentrated, and sad, and so was he. He didn't notice me for about 30 seconds because his head was bent and cocked at an odd angle down toward the gaping orifice of the instrument. There was a photograph and a red tank top at his feet. He may have been staring at either one of them or both. A bottle of Johnny Walker Black sat a little to his right. He looked up and saw me in the doorway. He didn't stop what he was doing, but gave enough of a nod to say I was welcome to come in. I didn't want to interrupt him, but I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay inside of that moment with him, inside the quiet. It felt right. It almost felt good. I sat on the floor across from him. I didn't feel like a guest. I belonged there. It was mine as much as his that day. I'm composing a symphony, Tim. It's something I think I will be very proud of. He kept on strumming the 2 chords of his song. It was sparse, stark, and bare. But I'm sure he was hearing much, much more than what was coming out of his guitar. It's going to be a symphonic suite, very formal and structured with scrupulous discipline. I am putting everything I have into this one, everything I have, everything I can get. The New York Philharmonic Strings, a Mormon Tabernacle Choir. No, fuck the Mormons, I'd rather the Vienna Boys. He glanced at me. And I want the middle part to sound like the last day of heaven. Celestial voices, violins, and cellos. I love cellos. The cello is a musical instrument that resembles a human voice more than any other. He stared at the photo. As my eyes got used to the room's dim light, I could see it was a picture of him and Rachel. He was sitting on her lap, and her arms were wrapped around him in a very protective way. She was wearing the same red tank top that was on the floor in front of him. Tim, me boy, this will be the first rock song to change water into wine, feed the multitudes, and raise the dead from their tombs. This last statement made him chuckle. And as the middle part hits its coda, God reaches down with his purple and his finger and grabs Adam right by the apple. Then the words start coming. And now I'm the coldest motherfucker ever walked a block in Harlem mid-December. Bobby Sledge, a.k.a. Bobby Rikers, carried a straight razor in his boot. Every time he went to the toilet, he dipped the blade into the bowl before he flushed whatever it was that come out of him. So the blade was constantly contaminated with all kinds of breeding bacteria, amoebas, parasites, and boogeymen. Woe unto she who got a bit of Bobby's blade. Lou stopped playing the guitar, took a big swig of scotch, lit a cigarette. He coughed 5 or 6 times, and after the first long drag, he hacked up something nasty into a tissue. Then he stuck the smoking ciggy back into his mouth and resumed his riff. And Bobby's just gonna tell the truth, man, right in the middle of the fucking church. He's gonna lay out all the cold, heartless, pitiless reality of this gutter we call life on earth. Another pause in the music. He took a long pull on a cigarette. And just as sudden as it started, it changes. Bang! Now it's 1957, and we're on a street corner in the Bronx, in the middle of the night, and Dion and the Belmonts are serenading all our sisters and our mothers and our lovers. Shit, maybe I'll ask Dion to do it himself, sing a few bars or a chorus. That would be very cool. You like Dion, Tim? I like The Wanderer. This made Lou laugh. You got good taste, kid. Maybe I'll get you instead of Dion. He stopped talking and he kept playing for a long time. Seemed like it was going to go on this way forever. And then he started singing. Love has gone away, and there's no one here now. He repeated these lines over and over. I'd never heard his voice sound that way before. It was delicate, fragile, wounded voice, and it echoed off the thick white of the walls. And then he added, took the rings off my fingers. This last phrase broke him. He kept strumming, but he stopped singing. He didn't cry or sob audibly, but the tears just fell on his hands and strings. I reached for his cigarettes without asking. It was both deliberate and unconscious, and I had never done that before. He caught me out of the corner of his eye, but he didn't question my being so bold. I think it pleased him, though his face was so full of misery, I can't say for sure. The fight and ferocity had left him. So had the cruelty and viciousness he could access in an instant. The child was in his eyes. I felt like his older brother. The 3 silver rings he wore on his fingers were gone, and so was Rachel. I didn't have to ask. The song was proof beyond a reasonable doubt. She was gone, and he would be too, because I couldn't imagine him remaining in the home they shared. I don't think he liked being alone, yet there weren't many people he liked being with. Knowing this made me feel special. He changed the rhythm of the song. The pace quickened, and he started singing again. There was a new tension in his voice as he repeated the phrases about his lost love. And after several refrains, he began to chant, come on and slip away. I wasn't sure what that meant. Did it mean to die? Did it mean to withdraw from the world and all its heartbreak and violence? Did it mean to get as high, as numb, as anesthetized as possible? He stopped his song. It was abrupt, like the needle being yanked off a record. His hands and arms went slack over the guitar, like he was cradling it, like he was shielding it from all the evil in the world. He lifted his head. The tears stopped. I had a strong desire to talk to him about Veronica, but I knew I couldn't. Not because this was a bad time. I just felt in my bones that it wasn't in the cards, and I'd never be able to bring it up with him. Thank you.
Thank you for those readings, guys. I guess I'll start with what I think all of these novels have in common first, and it's that each one begins in the aftermath of a death. The protagonist experiences something like that. So I suppose I want to ask you guys, what was your reasoning behind starting there, and what is it that you wanted to explore?
Yeah, I mean, the aftermath, I think, is a very interesting space in fiction, and a very charged space in fiction. And I think for the Third Hotel was thinking about sort of being in that headspace where something has upended your life to such a degree and in such an unexpected way that the world as you've understood it no longer makes sense. And the sort of way you've been tracking your life, the paradigms you've been using to understand your life no longer make sense. And there's a new framework has to be located. And that's really the space that I wanted to work in with this book. And the novel's also, Clara ends up going to a film festival that her husband had planned to go to, and strange things happen there, one of which she starts seeing him around, which is, odd for many reasons, and so I think the novel's partly about horror films too, and I think some of my favorite horror films are about grief, and really use these extreme dislocations of to reality as a way of, you know, navigating a character through this kind of underworld of really difficult emotion into a different space where their life has been, you know, shattered and then reshaped.
Grief is very rich material, partly because everybody experiences it. But I specifically wanted to write about suicide and suicide loss, because, well, for a few reasons. I mean, suicide has been on the rise for years now. I mean, it is, and it keeps rising. It was just something that I realized a few years ago, that quite a few people I knew were saying that they weren't threatening suicide, but they were saying that it had such reality to them that they thought that this was how they were going to leave this life. It was just, it was on their minds. They weren't making plans, etc. And I knew how real that was, and it just seemed, it wasn't that many people, but there was something very, very significant about it. And in fact, while I was writing the book, or before I'd finished the book, one of those people did jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. And when I got home from class, and there was an email that said, "Call me as soon as you get this email," I thought, Wesley's killed himself. It was just, I knew immediately. So, you know, so that was really the root of it. I wanted to write about that and think about that, and about the, you know, you know, how, as people say, well, when it's a suicide, there is no closure. I don't know if there's ever closure. Closure is a sticky idea, but anyway, that was where it came from for me.
I started writing this as a way to relate to the mind of a 16-year-old, because in 2013 my son was 16 and he was going through a difficult teenage year, and I thought it would be a good way to relate to that and remember what it's like and to somehow connect. I don't know if that really worked at all, but I started writing a book, so. And I started at the beginning, and I thought, if these two role models of adulthood or manhood to this boy are gone, then he's adrift in the city, and I thought that would be interesting, taking him from this blue-collar working-class neighborhood into maybe 2 miles or less away, which is a totally other world. But 3 months into the writing of it, Lou Reed died in late October of 2013, and in the last 12 years of his life, I'd become friends with him. And his death, when he died, it hit me on a very personal level, but also I had a lot of love and admiration for him as an artist. And it was the end of a certain, like I almost couldn't imagine New York without him, it brought up just a lot of feelings. So I had the idea of bringing him into the story. And I guess so the book in a lot of ways the story was a lot of ways born out of grief, and the book also deals with suicide. And I agree with what you said. I really think suicide has become epidemic in our society. And I felt that both personally and just looking at the world and hearing about it more and more. And about a year and a half into the book, one of my closest friends committed suicide. And I was right in the midst of working on this, and it really informed a lot of the latter part of the book. And I agree with you. I don't know if there's any closure anywhere ever. Someone asked me just before I did a panel about The Sopranos ending, which just, if you haven't seen it, just goes to black without any closure. And I said, you know, I don't think is there closure in life ever? When does life ever close? You know, when do we have that closure? I mean, those are all the things that are swirling about, and the way loss and grief infused itself into this book. And yeah, I guess that's all I can say on it, really.
Yeah, going from that point, the stories, they all involve, starting at that point with grief, dealing with some very serious subjects: suicide, death, losing a husband. These books, all the protagonists, in each of them, less explicitly in Laura's novel, but they meet somebody new. They're maybe searching for closure, but there's somebody that new who enters, their lives. And I guess maybe we could start with Sigrid, and you can tell us what happens to the narrator.
What happens to the narrator is that the mentor and friend who killed himself left behind a 180-pound Great Dane that he had actually found without tags, etc., running free in Prospect Park, and had taken it in, developed a very close relationship with the dog. But so the dog is his wife does not want the dog, does not think it's fair that she should have to take care of it. So the narrator is the one who ends up with this dog. She lives in a rent-stabilized 500-square-foot studio apartment whose lease stipulates no dogs allowed. What would you do? So she takes the dog, and the thing is, the dog, you can't explain death to an animal. So the person you love, your best friend, your master, whatever you want to call it, just doesn't come home. Why? Where would you know? You think of the anxiety of the dog that is wondering, is he in trouble? Aren't I supposed to be there, for one thing? But also, why did you leave me? So she's in mourning, and the dog is in mourning, and they're both going to lose the roof over their heads. But there they are, and there is a certain kind of transference that goes on. She wants to save this dog. She does not. The dog is not young. That's another thing. So there is this feeling that if she lets this dog, if she lets something bad happen to the dog, that she will not be able to live with herself. So there is this idea that it is too late to help him, but there is this beloved dog. And so, that a lot of the book is about that, how she the relationship, she's a cat person, how she develops a relationship with this dog, and how they end up helping each other.
Yeah, Laura, yours is a little different because the new person who enters the character's life, Claire's life, is almost like, again, her husband, and she has these scenes with possibly a ghost, or you don't really know, an entity, or just maybe it's in her mind. What inspired taking it in that direction?
Yeah, well, I was coming from a few different directions. I think that maybe sort of initially it's when I find myself in strange territory, or weird territory, my impulse is always to get even weirder. So a little bit of that. But yeah, I was interested in, the idea sort of in some ways is that she's at this festival, she's gone there to see a specific horror film that her husband believed would be groundbreaking, and that this sort of world would open up within that, within the real world of the festival, where she finds herself sort of in a kind of horror film or ghost story or nightmare state of her own design. So I was interested in seeing, I think grief is very dislocating. As we were, talking about before, that sense that the way that you've been tracking your life just doesn't work anymore, doesn't make sense anymore. So I was interested in seeing how far I could push that dislocation, how much I could layer that dislocation, and what would happen. And so that was the impetus.
And Michael, you already mentioned that, or Tim, but that's what Lou Reed calls him. His name's actually Matthew. Just starts calling him Tim. Did you, that would be so nerve-wracking to create, a character or a person that we all know, many love? What were some of the struggles that you had, if any, in bringing Lou Reed to the page? Because he reads quite well, and it's quite thrilling to spend time with him in these scenes.
Well, I wouldn't have written the book if he was alive, that's for sure. So that gave me a big license, But I've over the years read a lot about him, and this period of his life, the song that he's writing in this piece I read is called Street Hassle, which was also an album, but a really amazing song. It was around this time in his life, and he lived on the he mostly lived downtown most of his adult life in the Village, and but for a couple of years he lived on like East 53rd Street or something, and he had a transgendered girlfriend, Rachel, that he lived with, who he breaks up with in the book. And what I found very strange was the idea of Lou living in the East Side in this kind of posh building, and he was really out there. He was shooting an amphetamine called Desoxyn, which they would give to revive heart attack victims, and he would be, so up for days, really kind of out there. There was like barely anything in the apartment. I've read descriptions of it from people who were there, and there was nothing in the refrigerator, and there was boxes of stereo equipment because he had a deal with RCA at the time. And, I didn't find it weird that he was living with a transgender girlfriend. That's pretty, knowing his work, that's, that makes a lot of sense. But living on the East Side always struck me, really fascinated me, and made me want to write a book about him. But I wound up meeting him backstage at after The Sopranos was on. I got invited, and he was a fan, and we became friends. But I actually first met him in the mid-'90s. I saw him at a Knicks game, and I went up to him, and I was working on a movie called I Shot Andy Warhol. So I said, and I was playing a friend of his, Undine, who was one of the Warhol superstars. I was like, this is an opportunity for me to talk to him. But I also knew he was really pissed off they were making this movie about this crazy woman who almost killed his beloved Andy Warhol. So I got the courage, and I went up to him, I said, and I don't think he knew who I was back then, not many people did, and I said, I'm an actor, and I know you're really upset about this movie, but I got a part in I Shot Andy Warhol. He goes, I think it's despicable they're making a movie about that psychotic. It's horrible. And I'm like, oh, God. I said, well, I know, but I'm playing Undine. And he looked at me and he went, good luck. And he turned away. And we were on an escalator, right? And he was ahead of me, and then he turned back. And he looked at me, and I guess he just felt, and he walked back. He goes, listen, do your work, have fun, and just remember, Undine was very, very, very funny. And he walked away. So I saw the two kind of sides. I think that incident led to this book, actually.
I think we should open it up to the audience. If you guys have some questions, now would be the time. Yeah.
Sure. I am really interested in the difficulty of, translating grief through craft. Would you, and this I guess is a question for any of you, would you consider the biggest obstacle to completing your book emotional or practical?
There are so very many obstacles. Where to begin? I don't, for me, see the emotion as an obstacle. I think what's critical, it's my practice when I'm between projects is to keep a thought log, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a space in which I record what's been on my mind. And someone at a different event asked me, how do you know when you sort of have the beginning of something, right? Like maybe the beginning of a story or a novel. And I think the essential transference for me that must happen is that I begin to process the world and process, in this case, this extreme state of grief, not through my own sight, but through the eyes of a fictional character, where all of a sudden, I know it sounds paradoxical because Claire's not a real person, of course she did come from me, but at the same time, I'm starting to write things and think things and see things and notice things that do belong to her. And I think that it's finding expression through character and landing in that place where, you know, it's not just sort of my feelings, my thoughts, my experiences. Of course, they're in there, but they're also being given a body through this character is that sort of critical turn that has to happen.
I think the hardest thing really is just putting it into language that would be interesting for someone else to read. I mean, there's a point around where what I read where the narrator is trying to talk to the therapist, and you know, you don't really have to be articulate to a therapist, but she says, it's not that I don't know how I feel, I miss you. I miss you very much. I miss you every day. So I think the emotions are not, you know, aren't the main thing is getting those emotions into language, and you know, that does justice to what you're feeling. And then I think, you know, when you sit down to write, you know, even if, I mean, that's, you know, that's why some people are very careful not to write when they're in the heat of something. But you do get into a certain coldness about it. It's a job, you have to get it done. And you know, and I think that really helps, that you know that's your job to get it down, not to be all over with your feelings at that moment. That would be something that might be taking place at another time.
That makes a lot of sense. The biggest obstacle always is writing, if that makes any sense. The task of writing, or the physicality of it, and the discipline of it. I find emotion's a good engine to getting first thought down on paper, like just, you know, however it comes out, and then the challenge is crafting that into words that people will actually have is there a flow to it that you can read with pleasure and understanding and comprehension. But you know, there's a lot of gold in emotion because it's real, right? And I think it's in some ways stock and trade of art, in any discipline. But then it's really, you know, the obstacle and the challenge is crafting it. You know, it's often really inspiring. But I remember a certain passage when that I wrote in a really emotional state, and it's almost like channeling, and it's you wouldn't want anybody else to read it because it doesn't have flow, and it's probably not, parts of it don't make sense, and it's just not correct, and it's not, there's not a form to it, any kind of beauty, which you strive to, but I think that's kind of the wonderful thing about it. That's almost the mystery of it too.
We have maybe time for one more question. Anybody? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
So Sigrid, you said that, first of all, congratulations on the office.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So you said that you wrote this book as an exploration for friends who have mentioned suicide, and that at the end of it, when you actually did commit suicide, did that inform your revision process at all, or?
Not really, because I had already done a certain. I mean, it might have, but not that I was really aware of it. Because certainly, that is not the person that I was, you know, writing about. But there were certain things that. You know, that I would just remember that there was a certain amount of humor. I mean, the point is that this was a person who, like most suicides, they do talk about, you know, there are many myths about suicide. One of them is, don't worry about the people who talk about it all the time. Those are the people who don't do it. Not true, right? So there were things that I remembered that, you know, he had talked about it a lot. as a matter of fact, over the years that I knew him, and there were certain things that he said, some of them actually quite funny. And these things, are part of the book. But that's, it wasn't an emotional thing really. It was just part of the material. It didn't really change things. No.
Okay, I think we'll end there. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but the authors will be signing their books in the rotunda right downstairs, and you'll have a chance to ask them even more questions there. So let's give them a big round of applause. Thanks for coming out.